Just as we're pretty sure we know who Newt Gingrich is voting for on this election day. Good morning to you, Mr. Speaker.
Good morning.
You know, the polls are opening all across the country. Let's see, 10 and a half hours from now, the first polls are going to be closing. Tonight, what are you going to be watching for as the polls close to know whether or not you're having a good night with Donald Trump?
Well, let me just say, first of all, for a second, I hope everybody, whoever they're for, will recognize that this last year is something that doesn't occur in Cuba, doesn't occur in China, doesn't occur in Russia. This is what freedom is. And so I hope everybody will go out and vote today, to whoever you're for,
sure,
to validate this American process. I'm going to start with a couple of unusual places. I don't know what time it closes, but I'm going to look at the northernmost congressional district in Maine. Because if Trump picks that up, Maine allows each congressional district to cast its electoral vote separately. That'll be pretty unusual and a sign that a conservative Republican with blue-collar appeal can reach out on a place like Maine, as opposed to the assumption you have to be a moderate. Second, you got to look at New Hampshire. If Trump carries New Hampshire, it's game on. At that point, if I were Hillary and her team, I'd be very, very worried. Obviously, in the South, you're going to look at North Carolina, and you're going to look at Florida, because if Trump carries those two, we're really in for a long night, unless, as a poll that came out this morning suggests, he carries Michigan, in which case we're in for a very short night, because at that point it'll be clear that Donald Trump will be the next president. So I'm going to come from the East Coast, looking state by state. West Virginia will clearly go for Trump. Pennsylvania might go for Trump, although Philadelphia is very hard to beat and historically has a lot of voter fraud. Ohio is, I think, going to go for Trump, clearly. So the East is going to be better for Trump than you would have thought 6 months ago.
Yeah. So, Newt, the other thing to think about, and just put this in perspective because you're a walking, breathing historian, I don't remember how many crucial states ever were within the margin of error. Everywhere. Doesn't matter if you're going for Bloomberg or the ABC poll. Everything's within the margin of error, which makes you think we got 50 separate games to run today, or at least 12 separate games that could go either way.
Yeah, I mean, part of what has, I think, led to some confusion is that Hillary's carrying, for example, California, which is a big state, by a very, very big margin. Well, if you average that into the national average, she looks great. But if she's that far ahead in California and she's only tied or barely ahead nationally, that means she's probably behind in a lot of very, very tight states. In Missouri, maybe Wisconsin, where Calista and I spent the weekend with her mother. Maybe in Minnesota, where the high school students, by the way, 77,000 of them, gave Trump the victory over Hillary, something you'd never have expected in Minnesota. So things are changing out there. The country's talking to itself. And I'll be very curious whether it's actually this close or whether the momentum for Trump means that it was this close on a snapshot over the weekend. This is what happened with Reagan. He gained strength every single day up through Election Day.
I want to put up two different pictures because it shows kind of the direction of both of these campaigns. You have Hillary campaigning with President Obama. So if you want more of the same, there's the answer. If you want more of change and anti-establishment, then on the left-hand side of the screen is Donald Trump with his family, with the exception of Mike Pence, who has, held a Senate seat and now governor. But those are totally different. If you want the same, vote for Hillary. If you want different, then vote for Donald Trump.
Look, this may be the clearest big choice election, and certainly in my lifetime, but in a very, very long time. Secretary Clinton represents the establishment, the whole system, everything we've been watching with the WikiLeaks, the FBI files, you name it, and she is the legitimate heir to Barack Obama. Donald Trump is the most outsider candidate to be nominated in my lifetime. This is a guy who 2 years ago, and you guys have known him a long time, but if somebody had walked into you and said 2 years ago, he's going to beat 16 other guys, become the Republican nominee, and by Election Day, you're not going to know who's going to win, you'd have thought they were crazy.
Yeah.
You're probably right. Newt, just hours to go before the polls do wind up closing. What is your message as a lifelong conservative and Republican to the Republicans or the independents or Democrats, for that matter, who have said, I'm just going to sit this out and not vote for my person because I don't like either one of them?
My message is that there are, and I say this as an Army brat whose dad spent 27 years in the infantry, there are young men and women all around the world risking their lives to protect your right to be a free citizen and to vote. And I think you dishonor them if you don't go vote. And don't just focus on the presidency. What about the school board? What about the county commission? What about the state legislature? What about Congress? I think every American has a moral obligation to renew the trust in our society every time there's an election, and to let those young folks around the world know they're not risking their lives in vain, that we as Americans treasure our freedom, and that we believe that we have an obligation to strengthen and renew that freedom with every election.
Well, that's a good reason to vote, indeed.
There's no doubt about it. If he is to win, and conservatives needed someone to build off of, you as a conservative going for Donald Trump kind of led the way. Newt Gingrich, it's going to be an interesting night. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Great night.
Thank you.
Take care.